Good. Well, welcome to the March 16th virtual Capital Connection call. I want to thank you all for joining us, and of course, thank our sponsors for today's event, our Advent Health, Polk State, and of course, supported by Tampa Electric. So excited to be able to provide weekly updates this year to what's going on in session. So I'm going to pop in and share my screen with you all so we can get started. Okay. So it was a busy last week. Today on the call, we're going to go over what happened last week, what we're expecting to happen this week, a little bit in terms of a federal update, and then, of course, open it up for questions for you. So last week, there was a couple major changes to our legislative, several of our legislative priorities. And of course, want to share with you our panel of delegation members who are working very hard. It is intense in terms of committee meetings going on right now and a lot of movement on different things. And as I mentioned to you last week, the House passed COVID liability on general business. And so if you see any of our House members or have an opportunity to talk to them, please thank them for that as well. So our legislative recap, as I mentioned, the Winter Haven Chamber of Commerce does support liability relief legislation that provides a safe harbor for the good actors out there trying to do everything they can in this crazy time from frivolous lawsuits. So as I mentioned, the House passed business liability protection. And then 3 committees in the House have passed the healthcare legislation. And so it could be included in the House, is in session on March 18th. And so it could be included in that. But as of last night at 11 o'clock p.m., nothing was listed in terms of being on the agenda yet. So where the major movement in this category came from was in the Senate. So COVID business liability, Senate Bill 72, COVID healthcare liability, Senate Bill 74. They were essentially merged together last week. So the bill sponsors merged those bills together and basically is expected to go through the Senate without any major issues. The question will be when it does, how does the House then handle it? Do they adopt the Senate bill in this kind of combined, where it combines both healthcare and the business in one bill? Do they march forward with their bills? Obviously, at the end of the day, it will have to pass both houses. So see how that all comes together. And this just gives you an outline of how the merged bills looks at the Senate side. So now it's just Senate Bill 72. And you can see it protects business entities, educational institutions, government entities, religious and healthcare facilities and its practitioners. Requires proof with clear and convincing evidence that the entity was grossly negligent for the business side and non-healthcare entities, and then sets a different standard for healthcare facility negligence. And of course, requires a good faith effort, which of course all of our members are making, and then implements a 1-year statute of limitations. So something that we are fervently behind and certainly want to see this pass. It's the last thing that all of our businesses need to be worried about over the course of this next year. We also saw movement on what we're calling the Main Street Fairness, but essentially supports legislation that creates equity in Florida's tax system. So a deal was struck last week between the House Speaker and the Senate President, and you kind of see an explanation there, but essentially it would backfill the state unemployment compensation trust fund with the revenue that would be generated by the annual sales tax. So many of you may not have been aware, but there was going to be a increase of, and you see here, $713 million tax increase on unemployment taxes. And so it was a priority, certainly of the business community, to not see that happen. And so this essentially accomplishes 2 things in one agreement. And of course, there's a long way to go before anything gets passed, but this essentially checks 2 boxes. It creates that balance between the internet sales tax and online retailers versus Main Street retailers. But it also helps to fill a budget need in terms of the unemployment compensation trust fund. So We'll obviously continue to watch this closely, but some creative minds working up there in Tallahassee to see how we could potentially solve both problems. And this is just your weekly reminder that Florida is only one of 2 states that has not enacted something to collect that internet sales tax and create more of a even playing field. So by the numbers from last week, we're up 9 bills. So we've had 2,970 bills filed. And so, as you see, as we get further into session, less bills filed, more bills passed. So at this point, as of last night, only 2 bills had passed the House, none in the Senate. Of course, the Senate and the House both have session scheduled at this point for Thursday of this week. A couple updates on bills I mentioned to you last week. Senate Bill 88 relating to farming operations. I mentioned this to you in terms of protecting farmers and the activities and their business activities. That is scheduled for 3rd reading during the March 8th session on the Senate side this week. Highway projects. This is the bill that there are 2 bills on the that would try to completely cancel MCORs, which is the a large bill that protected funding for 3 potential toll roads, one of which was a Polk County to Collier. There are 2 bills that would completely repeal that. Neither of those have been heard yet, but the bill that tweaks it, if you will, it does repeal it, but it keeps the protection around the funding of at least 2 of those corridors. Unfortunately, not the Polk to Collier, but around at least 2 of those corridors. So that is now set to go to the Senate Appropriations, and looking last night, it is scheduled on Thursday at 11:30 to be heard there. And then just some updates in terms of some other things we talked about last week. Senate Bill 48, which is school choice legislation. I did not yet see that scheduled on the session agenda. And of course, that has people strongly for and strongly against. And we talked about that a little bit last week. And then House Bill 419 relating to education passed out of its 1st and 2nd committee stop with unanimous votes, and has 2 more committee references on the House side. And this has to really has to do with VPK accountability and making sure that we know that those schools are doing well and what they're intended to do. So this is a long list, but just an update on bills. Don't want to forget about what we've talked about the week prior. And so percentage of electoral votes, that was the bill I mentioned that would, in order to approve an amendment or a revision, they would be asking for 66% of the vote instead of the 60% threshold. That's now in rules. Cottage food industry passed. The regulated industry is favorable. That had to do with expanding the annual revenue to still be considered a cottage food industry. Measurement reporting, which is a request of our Polk County Public Schools to set a deadline when the Department of Education has to give those measurement reporting so they're not moving teachers around. That passed favorable last week from its committee hearing, and it's now on to Education and Employment Committee. Residential property insurance passed favorably last week and is now in rules on March 18th. QTI passed favorably. This is on our agenda. We want to see whether it's QTI or some other program, but we want to see some state incentives with economic development. Just another tool in the toolkit. Doesn't necessarily always needs to be used, but something that can be a good tool for us. So that's in Finance and Tax on the 18th. The beverage law, which I mentioned to you last week, is really meant to extend some of the benefits, if we're going to take some silver linings from this last year in terms of to-go alcohol beverages and things of that nature. Third stop in rules this week on the Senate side. There's a similar bill in the House. There's actually 2. This one is not Representative Tomko's bill that's being heard this week, but another representative. But there's movement on that. So we'll continue to watch that. Home-based businesses, which was a preemption bill in terms of local governments being able to regulate where home-based businesses are and preempting that to the state. That did pass favorable and referred to the House calendar. And then Florida Tourism Marketing, or Visit Florida Marketing, was favorable and has 1 more stop in appropriations. And then saw Polk State College had renovations for enhanced security. That was actually on an agenda yesterday and passed the appropriations subcommittee and is now onto appropriations on the House side. So some local movement there as well. And I know I go a million miles an hour, so feel free to drop something into the Q&A, and I will try to keep an eye on it as well if I see that number pop up there. So other ones that we are watching, there is one in particular that has gotten a lot of people excited about, and maybe it's just all of our own experience, but I mentioned to you amending Florida Brights, and something that many of us used, I did, and certainly many of our kids have used. And so it was supposed to be heard last week, and it is was essentially pooled at the last minute. The date you see on there was when it was pooled. It's now being proposed amended and is on the agenda for today at 12:30. And essentially just got a synopsis that I thought was helpful yesterday. The bill sponsor, Baxley, filed a strike all amendment that modifies the legislation in several ways. The program would be altered more gradually than previous contemplated, and other differences include doing away with the requirement that students only participate in certain degree programs, which was a big pushback. A lot of the pushback was saying you can't get it at all or anything along those lines if you didn't participate in degree programs that the state deemed as able to get you a job at the end of the day. Instead, the amendment to his bill reduces the award amount for any degree program that is deemed as not leading to employment. The strike all adds a qualifier to a section that students worried would penalize them for taking on accelerated high school courses such as AP. Students still not able to apply for Bright Futures Awards to a course that they've already received credits for in high school. But now that provision would only kick in if the post-secondary institution also accepts those credits. So they're working through that bill. I don't know if it has any legs to go anywhere, but it's certainly something that impacts a large portion of the students in college students in the state of Florida. So and future college students. So watching that. The entertainment industry bill, again, film incentives have been something that we've talked about in the past, and certainly saw a decrease in film activity after that was kind of taken off the table. So no update at this point, but something we're watching closely. Craft distilleries and an expansion of the industry. Third reading on the Senate floor agenda on Thursday, favorable at a second committee, and one more stop in the House. And then public records and economic development is one we're watching. And that essentially would allow for certain personal information for an economic development applicant to not be in the public record. So, home address and tax returns and things of that nature. So you see that one is moving forward. One bill that I haven't brought up before, except just to mention that there has been some movement on autonomous vehicles. Obviously something that could be good for our area as Florida Poly is so involved in autonomous vehicles. And that technology around there. So Senate Bill 138 and 140 create a new program within FDOT to build electric vehicle charging stations, funded through an electric vehicle tag fee. So something we're watching there. And then I mentioned a bill last week that creates more regulatory certainty around autonomous delivery vehicles. And certainly something we hear a lot about, whether that be low speed shuttles, but really starting to create some bills that modernize existing legislation around autonomous vehicles and transportation in general. And I do not expect you to read this unless if you are involved in tourism, you might want to screenshot this one. So it passed its first committee, 2 to go on the House side, but every year we watch very closely. In fact, it makes our agenda every year about protecting funding for tourism and marketing Florida. This particular bill starts to change the way local governments can use the monies that are collected through the tourist tax. It's going to have a lot of pushback from the tourism industry. This in particular one defines that you can use for flood mitigation and various things that have to do with that, finance flood mitigation projects or improvements. So I imagine that there'll be a large industry pushback on this. There has been a lot in under the protection of that tourist development tax to continue to market. An example here locally is the Field House. The Field House was able to be funded by over $11 million of tourist development tax. Now, the city of Winter Haven put in a lot more money than that, but to be able to reinvest in structures that not only benefit recruitment of sports and tourists, but also into the quality of life of the residents. So just something we want to pay very, very close attention to. House and Senate are in session on Thursday, March 18th. I didn't have a slide of all the different meetings and all the different bills this week because I just mentioned a lot of those to you that we're watching and where they're at. But the Senate, as of last night, already had things listed on their agenda. The House did not at this point in terms of an agenda for their session yet. So watching that closely as we do every week. So federal updates, and then we'll pop into any questions. And for you, those of you that this is the first time you join this call, this is very rapid fire. I meant to kind of give you what you need to know. This is your weekly skim, if you will, of what's going on. But I will be sending out a more detailed email to membership today on the American Rescue Plan. Partially why I didn't send out something immediately like I normally do is there was a lot to unpack on this bill, more than what the media kind of, CNN or Fox News article might tell you. And I wanted to see exactly how our businesses would be able to take advantage of it. And we don't have all the answers yet, but I'm listening to a couple seminars this morning of people that have spent the weekend diving into all the language of the bill. Stimulus checks, I have had a couple people tell me they've already received them, so that they are coming already and they're coming quickly. Renewal of PPP for small business. However, they did not extend the deadline beyond March 31st to apply. There has been a bill already filed to extend the deadline to May 31st. And you might think, well, why do they need to do that? Well, here's an example for you. If you were not eligible for some reason to apply for PPP in 2020, and but the December COVID liability bill or COVID assistance bill allowed you to apply, but you may need to apply for a second draw just since you weren't able to apply in 2020. You would have had to use all of your first round PPP funds in order to apply for a second round PPP fund. And so that timeline doesn't really allow you to apply for that. So there will be a push for sure to extend that deadline, but we'll have to see if that happens or not. There'll be specific programs for restaurants, and that's actually the seminar I was listening to this morning. So I'll have more details on that. But specific programs, this is the first time restaurants have been carved out as their own industry. There are changes to the employee retention tax credit. So we just had a workshop on that last week. You can find it on our YouTube, but I'll kind of let you guys know what changes there are to that. And then changes to the shuttered venue program, which has not been really pushed out in full force because there's so many questions surrounding how that can be used. For example, our local theater Winter Haven, thankfully, they do pay acts. So they don't pay their actors necessarily all the time, although they do, depending on, I don't know how that works, SAG or, theater guilds and whatever it might be, but they do the concert series and all of that sort of thing. But if you are a community theater who works 100% on volunteers, you were not eligible to apply for this. I don't know if they've made any changes to that bill. I've not been able to dive into it yet, but that's another example in terms of the arts and programs out there to support that. So a lot of things on that. And then after the last call, got quite a few questions on the ProAct. The ProAct did pass the US House and then is now going to the Senate. A call I was on yesterday about this in particular talked about how it's got an uphill battle in the Senate. And that there just might not be enough votes if it were to go to filibuster. There just may not be enough votes. This is one everyone should be paying attention to as business owners. So there are a lot of provisions in this law. A lot of it has to do with unions, and of course the ProAct acronym is protecting the right to organize. So that's what it is about. But there are a couple provisions in the bill that would change the way we do business in Florida. and one of which is essentially ending right to work laws. So as you can see from what I've described here, and as you all know, Florida is a right to work state. And essentially such states are referred that way because you do not have to pay union dues. It's not a condition of employment. You do not have to join a union in order to work at a particular place if there happens to be a union there. And under the ProAct, unionized workplaces would require payment of union dues. And so this obviously is a huge concern to the business community. And there are 27 states out there, so half the country, over half the country, that are right to work states. So a lot of interesting debate around that. And then one of the things that I was reading an article written by a franchise association is the reclassification of employees. And so currently the National Labor Relations Act recognizes that only employees, as opposed to managers, supervisors, or independent contractors, have the right to form, join, or assist unions. The ProAct would help to redefine employee and a supervisor, but also would impact the definition or how we would classify independent contractor, and increase penalties if you classify them the wrong way. But where this comes in to, this has a lot of far-reaching ramifications that we should bring an attorney on to talk about. But one of those is how it would interact with franchise agreements. You see here on the screen here, current employers such as franchisors are only liable for the acts of their franchisees or contractors if they both directly control the terms and conditions of employment. The ProAct could change that and change the liability formula there. So, just a lot to, I use this term a lot to unpack on this bill, but a lot of consequences to this particular bill, and something that every business owner should really be paying attention to in terms of how it moves through, if it moves through the Senate. But I know the U.S. Chamber has taken a strong position against this bill. The Florida Chamber has taken a strong position against this bill. This has not come before our board yet, but I know that there'll be some strong feelings. So we have not taken a position, obviously, at this point with it not going before our board, but it is very concerning, extremely concerning. So we will continue to watch that. So that is a 26-minute update of what's going on this week in Tallahassee and at the federal level, and the things that we are watching. Just a lot of movement on things on our legislative agenda. Things are starting to pick up, although I know for those of you that are up in Tallahassee listening on this call, I'm sure it felt like it's been crazy from day one committee week. But just a lot of, there's some positive things. There's some things that we're watching that we are concerned about. But overall, just a lot of movement there. So I didn't see any questions come into the Q&A. So if you do have any questions, please let me know. If you don't want to ask the question necessarily right now and on the call, please feel free to shoot me an email. If I can get you more information on any of these bills, we would be glad to do that. Just know we're watching closely as much as we can keep up with it, as much as I can spend my wee hours of the morning catching up on all the different blogs and finding out what's going on from the different perspectives. And then, of course, keeping in touch with our legislative delegation. We do have a fantastic delegation up in Tallahassee who are really focused on the needs of Polk County. They're sitting there learning and absorbing and understanding the ramifications of different bills, just like the rest of us are. And so, if we can help them understand and put you in contact with them, what the impact of a particular piece of legislation specific to your industry maybe, please let us know, and we would be more than happy. They want to hear from us. They want to hear what our take on things are. And so please keep that in mind. Arlene, I do see your comment in there. My email address is Katie, Katie, @winterhill, havenchamber.com. Shoot me an email. I will be glad to get you anything you need. And with that, I'll pause for 1 second to see if there are any other questions that pop in. All right. I don't see anything else popping in. Again, if you need anything between now and next Tuesday when we do our next update call, please let me know. I know next week is spring break. Hopefully some of you guys get to take a little bit of a respite. But if you don't and you want to pop on this call, next Tuesday at 10, we'll be back here again. So everyone, thank you so much for your time today and have a very productive Tuesday.